all very much. My name is Rich Cochran. I work at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I'm going to talk to you today mostly about oil and gas exploration and conservation. And we've termed our strategy uncommon ground for the common good, because when we studied oil and gas and conservation, just oil and gas in general, we realized there's very little common ground and there's very little common good. And I think in this room I can tell, having listened to all of you, all of us are seeking more common ground for the common good. So unfortunately in the world of oil and gas, it's very uncommon. We also have subtitled the strategy, The Greatest Threat is the Greatest Opportunity. We firmly believe, having studied this, in particular shale gas and oil exploration for 3 years, there is a huge opportunity embedded in the threats. To understand our approach, I think it's good to understand our philosophy, which is that we're not a traditional environmental conservation organization, although we do those kinds of projects. We really view ourselves as an enterprise that can build natural infrastructure into communities, natural infrastructure that's appropriate to support that place specifically so that that place can be enduring and prosperous. So we won't do conservation for the fun of it necessarily. We'll only do it if we think that place will benefit and become more enduring, more prosperous in a more enduring way. I'll get into that a little more. For those of you who aren't aware of this, there's a massive oil and gas boom underway in the United States of America right now related to shale exploration. It's a very interesting, complicated field of study. But just to bottom line it, these shale formations are everywhere, including right here. You have some Tuscaloosa and some Haynesville here in Mississippi. There's at least a 30-year supply of natural gas and at least a 4-year complete supply of oil. Those are extremely conservative numbers. Those are upgraded every day, literally. It'll be many, many decades of supply when they're done. These are assuming probably less than half the shale and assuming 5 to 10% recovery. In Ohio, it's called the Utica Point Pleasant Formation. This is Cleveland. This is Pennsylvania. This is Lake Erie. And, oh, geez, go back for 1 sec.
I got one more to jump.
This is the sweet spot of the Utica. It's all of eastern Ohio. Many, many millions of acres of land area, most of which is pretty rural. It's actually kind of like this part of Mississippi. It's rich agricultural land. There's forestry land, surface water assets, wildlife assets. The economy of that part of Ohio is very reliant on natural endowments. We often study economic activity when we're going into a new area to try to figure out where our mission overlaps with important economic activity so we can put the right kind of investment into that place for enduring prosperity. And in most of Ohio, it's these two drive most economic activity. Eastern Ohio, agriculture by far the largest component, and then manufacturing in certain small cities as well. Just like here in Ohio, we have both agriculture, traditional, what you'd think of as farming, but also forestry. Farming accounts for $100 billion a year of economic activity in Ohio. It is by far the largest activity in eastern Ohio. We have prime soils of every kind, everything from vineyard soils to muck soils to grain soils. We also have a lot of water resources. So many of you are familiar with Lake Erie, and Lake Erie is indeed a big freshwater source, but that black line shows you where you're not allowed to use Lake Erie water. No Great Lakes water can go north if it comes, can go south of that line, in Ohio anyway. And that's state, federal, and international law now, so really nowhere. So south of that line, you have to have your own water, not Lake Erie water in Ohio. And consequently, the dominant geographic feature in Ohio south of that line is man-made surface water reservoirs. Billions of dollars of investment in man-made surface water reservoirs. Look at it. It's a web. By the way, this is the epicenter of Utica shale activity. You're going to get a feel for what that means in about 1 slide or 2 slides. Why have we spent billions of dollars? Because these aren't important economic assets. These are essential. They're foundational. They transcend economic asset. They're so important. Everything is derivative of those assets. And the third major category, wildlife resources, $3.6 billion a year in Ohio associated with hunting and fishing. This is our former governor and Senator Voinovich. Told me that was the greatest day of his life. We helped him catch a huge steelhead on the Chagrin. In eastern Ohio, hunting and fishing, like in the Delta of Mississippi, is more important to the social and cultural fabric than it is even to the economics, although it is a huge economic driver. The courts are closed, the banks are closed, the schools are closed, not for a day, for a week, literally. For the first week of hunting season, there is nobody there. They're all in a cabin or blind. The Utica is famous in the oil and gas industry because the wells are so big. These are bigger than offshore wells. Not all offshore wells, but these are bigger than a lot of offshore wells. And these are, we're just learning how to get the oil and gas out of the Utica still. The first big well was the Buell well at 3,000 barrel of oil equivalent per day, 24-hour production. But you can see within just 2 years, we had a 9,000 barrel of oil equivalent per day well come up in the Utica. And again, we're still learning how to construct these wells and perfect the completions. So these are going to continue to get bigger. These are huge wells. This is the Eagleford, the most famous formation in America right now for economics, for shale formation, South Texas. You can see their average per county high point was only 3,800 barrels of oil equivalent per day through 2012. So the Utica is probably going to be even more economically productive than the Eagleford. Just to give you a quick snapshot of the overall economic activity, in 2012, all the wells had to be reported on. Actually, in March of 2013, we added up all the numbers. Average of all wells in the Utica was $6 million of product sales in 2012. That's amazing. $6 million of product sales in the first year of production. These are 30-year wells. 50 million was the best well in Harrison County of product sales in its first year. There's so many implications of this. It's incredible, right? One being that if you happen to be the landowner on the average well, you'd get $1 million of royalty payments at a 15% royalty your first year alone. Here's the core of the Utica. 7 counties. There's about 25 counties in the Utica altogether, but these 7 counties are really good. And if you assume half of the acreage in those counties will be explored in the next, say, 5 or 10 years, that's 1 million acres of land area. So that's half of the land area. It'll all get explored, but just be conservative and say half, and say the wells are spaced at 200 acres. That's 5,000 wells. That's $30 billion of product sales just if they're the average of the first year, which is going to be higher. That's $30 billion. It's going to cost $30 to $40 billion to drill those 5,000 wells. That's not multiplier economic development consultant money. That's real money. So, and $10 billion of midstream to serve those wells. It's $100 billion of direct money just to get to the first 5,000 wells, which is just half the acreage in just the 7 counties that are currently in play. It's just an astounding amount of activity. So we've studied it a lot. As you can imagine, it's the hugest economic force, external force we'll ever encounter. And in South Texas, we learned a lot about drilling through some friends of mine who run oil companies. We got onto the rigs and learned about the drilling. But what we really learned is South Texas is not Northeast Ohio. There are no redeeming natural assets on the surface that drive economic activity other than oil rigs. It's just dry and not productive. And the Bakken in northwest North Dakota is the same. We call it the Eagleford with snow. Whereas Carroll County, Ohio, is the land of milk and honey. I mean, it's the most beautiful, productive place you've ever seen in your life. Completely reliant on agriculture and forestry. What we learned in the Bakken was these are well pads where they drill from, and these are horizontals about 7,000 feet below the earth. What we learned was back in the old days, you had to destroy the surface of the earth with vertical exploration. Today, this is so planful and so scarce, they're drilling 1,300-acre units from a 3-acre well pad, 2 square miles from 3-acre well pads. So, and look how planful it is. You could run your combine all day long, or you could grow your sustainable forest all day long in between those planful wellhead impacts. Back in the old days, you couldn't. And here you can see this is a 1,300-acre area being drained by 6 wells from a single well pad in the Bakken. That's what we're doing in Ohio. So what we learned was, we've been drilling oil wells in Ohio since 1859. John D. Rockefeller was from that area, among many others. And this is a typical configuration. This is an actual farm in Stark County with 23 existing oil wells and gas wells. And I've talked to this farmer, and he said, it's kind of like mowing my lawn with a lot of trees in the front yard. It takes me forever to farm now that I have those oil wells on my farm. It's fragmented. He's got to go around everything. Today, you would have at most one in the middle, and you probably wouldn't have any because that's only a 650-acre farm. So we got excited about the prospect here. We were scared to death at first, but then we realized we might be able to have more conservation in concert with oil and gas exploration than we thought. We were very concerned about the groundwater issues, and I'm not concerned anymore. If I had more time, I'd tell you why. But the bottom line is the casings are like fortresses in horizontal hydraulic wells, and they're pieces of crap in the old vertical wells, which we've drilled 250,000 of in Ohio. So I often ask my environmental friends, where were you when we drilled the first 250,000 wells with crappy casings? Why are you objecting now when we have fortresses? What really scared us the most was the economic unintended consequences. And we studied Dutch disease a lot. It's named for the Netherlands, not for Dutch elm disease. I know Steve has a good joke about Dutch elm disease. I won't tell it now. But in the Netherlands, what happened was in 1959, the dominant economic sector, which was manufacturing and agriculture, represented by that line, began to be disinvested in because there was a major natural gas field discovered. So they had an existing energy sector that was a little bit of economic activity, and they had dominant economic enduring sectors in manufacturing and ag. Well, what happens when you have a high profit margin, sexy lottery-like money like oil and gas? Everybody invests in it, everybody talks about it, it sucks up all the oxygen in the system. And after 20 years of disinvestment in your enduring sectors, what happens is they are depleted. There's no new investment in them of people and ideas and capital. All of that got sucked up by the energy sector. The bottom line is that's a finite resource that just sucked up all the enduring investment, and they start to decline. The finite resource tends to start to decline right when you've destroyed your enduring resource unwittingly. Right? It's human nature. It's very sad. Now, that happened in 1959 and 1979. It just happened last year in Azerbaijan, the world's fastest growing economy, according to The Economist, not according to me. And The Economist further said Azerbaijan's agricultural output contracted the same year Azerbaijan was the world's, not a good economy, the world's fastest growing economy. In addition, it's the most important part of the non-oil economy and is the largest source of non-oil exports. And yet it contracted the same year the overall country economy was the fastest growing in the world. In addition, as economists know, it destroys manufacturing economies. The same reason, no investment. Everybody pours everything into these non-recurring, non-tradables because they're high margin, but they're finite. And yet, everybody talks about all the wrong things with fracking. 215 experts couldn't get anything right. It's like Congress. They especially got this wrong. The 4 biggest risks are not liquid drilling waste, not emissions, not water withdrawals, not site construction. Those don't even pale in comparison to the big risk of destroying our economies while we also might destroy our environment because everybody's fighting about it. Here's how I often feel when I'm talking to people about this. I feel like I'm standing in my apartment looking out at the ocean. My wife's got her back to the ocean. She's explaining how we're going to be late for dinner. And I'm worried because we're about to get killed by a tidal wave. And the tidal wave is going to crash in 20 years. That's what's so scary about the tidal wave of Dutch disease, especially in the context of a fight. Everybody's fighting about fracking, fractivists and the frackers. What happens when you're fighting? Well, my grandma always told me when I was little, Chichi, you can't give a fight away. You always get a fight back. Now, those of you who are married or used to be married know this. Try to give a fight away to your husband or your wife and see if you get a lot of love back during that fight. The reason is called karma in the scriptures, but it's also called biochemistry. And the scariest thing about the biochemistry is when you're fighting, your adrenaline shuts your prefrontal cortex down and you can't be creative and constructive, which is a good thing because you don't have time to be when you're fighting. But when you're fighting about fracking, you should actually be thinking instead of fighting. What we realize is this is actually a way for us to apply all of our strengths. We can do urban revitalization in the small cities of eastern Ohio with this sudden high margin wealth. There will be money again to reset those cities. So when those 100 million people come into our cities over the next however many years Rand said they would, they'll be ready. They'll be cleaner and greener. We can do wildlife conservation. We can do natural areas conservation. We can set them up for the next 50 to 100 years now while we're rich with finite high margin money. We can invest in our agricultural sector and our manufacturing sector while we're at it. It's always better to invest when you're rich, right? Peel off a little bit every day and invest in the future when you're rich, not when you're poor. Use that non-recurring economic activity to create enduring prosperity instead of what we always do. We always act as a community like lottery winners. Not as individuals, but as a community, we always do. So if we can create dynamic collaboration and identify the essential assets, clean up our cities, and invest in innovation, we'll actually make the best of something that is often very scary. This is not a novel idea. Sheikh Zayed did it in 1970. As a benevolent dictator, he was able to set aside now what is trillions of dollars in investment in Abu Dhabi to create non-oil economies, to create a healthier environment. We don't have a benevolent dictator in America, which is a good thing, because benevolent dictators are very rare. We would end up with a bad one. But you can engineer one. It's a process called appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry basically gets everyone under a tent. I'm talking about hundreds of stakeholders, and you dream aspirationally together. And I'll tell you about it later over dinner, because we don't have time now. But it basically is the opposite of you can't give away a fight. You know, my grandma also told me you can't give away a smile. Just try to give away a smile. You always get a smile back. Try to give away a hug. You always get a hug back. And the reason is we're at our best when we're working together. We have, again, biochemicals flooding our system when we're working together that help us be creative and constructive. The best example so far of what can happen is recently reported in Scientific American. We can use horizontal hydraulic fracturing, the bane of every environmentalist's existence, to fracture hot rock formations that have no hydrocarbons in them and create nearly emission-free, nearly free binary geothermal turbine generators. I'll explain it to you later. It's absolutely the simplest, most brilliant thing you've ever heard of, and it is being worked on right now, not by people who are fighting, though. So, use the fleeting to fund the enduring. And I'll just finish by saying all of our cities should look like this. All of our countrysides should look like this. If we can stop fighting for 1 minute as a community of conservationists, as a community of industrialists, and instead dream together, if we can just say the simple thing, which is you always want to fund the enduring with the fleeting instead of destroy the enduring with the fleeting, it would be so easy to do. Think about 100, just in eastern Ohio, $100 billion that's real economic activity. This is happening all over the country. If we can come together and do this, we will change the world, literally, with this one-time money. So thank you for listening.